Welcome to the Delighted Customers Podcast. I am so glad you're here. We challenge conventional thinking about customer experience because I believe that improving experiences isn't just good for business, it's a powerful way to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Each week, we feature thought-provoking conversations with industry thought leaders from a variety of backgrounds, offering unique perspectives and actionable insights. Get ready to sharpen your leadership and transform your approach to customer experience. Let's dive in. Forrest Morgeson is an associate professor in the Department of Marketing in the Eli Broad College of Business at Michigan State University. He also serves as a co-director of the doctoral program in marketing. Dr. Morgeson teaches marketing management, marketing strategy, and marketing research courses to grad students. He is also currently serving as the interim chairperson of the marketing department, and I happen to be a professor of practice in the marketing department, so fortunate to get access to him and have him on the show today. But to continue on, one of the things we're going to talk about, and that's relevant to his background, is he, in his past position, was a director of research at the American Customer Satisfaction Index, ACSI, where he managed ACSI's academic research and a team of researchers, advanced statistical modeling and analysis, and the company's international projects and licensing program. And if that's not enough, Dr. Morgeson research focuses on customer satisfaction and customer experience measurement and management, and he's been published in all the leading journals in marketing, and he recently has published 2 books, Citizen Satisfaction, Improving Government Performance, Efficiency, and Citizen Trust, and The Reign of Customer, what's the last part of that one?
The Reign of the Customer.
The Reign of the Customer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Welcome. I wanted to do that long intro because I think your background and your credentials are just so impressive and so relevant to the audience that typically listens. Thank you so much for joining the show, Forrest.
Thank you for having me. It was a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, it's exciting, and I'm so honored and privileged to have you on the show. Today, we're going to be talking about something hopefully that's right in your sweet spot, which is the link between satisfaction, loyalty, and ROI. So to help level set for the audience, some people may not be as familiar with others as ACSI. What is it? How did it originate? How did it evolve? And what was your sort of connection to it?
Yeah, it's a project that was founded at the University of Michigan about almost exactly 30 years ago now, back in 1994, in the summer of 1994. It was a group of faculty at the University of Michigan Business School. It's now the Stephen M. Ross School of Business, that came together, and they were all marketing faculty, and they said, we need a better measure of what's going on out there in the economy. That was the genesis of the project. Both at the company level, but also at the aggregate level. Within economic industries and sectors, we need a better idea of not just the quantity of output, but the quality of output. That was the core idea. The discussion was, how do we measure the quality of output in a way that's meaningful for the economy? And these folks got together, led by a professor named Klaus Fornell, a world-famous marketing professor who I've had the pleasure to work with for 20 years now. And it said, well, to measure the quality of economic output, you really need to talk to the customers who are purchasing goods and services and consuming them. And so they started this project where they were looking at the time, it was about 200 companies within about 30 economic industries, all the large customer-facing sectors of the economy. And they went out and did interviewing of all these customers and said, hey, how do you like, how satisfied are you with the products and services you've purchased from McDonald's or at the time AT&T or whatever the various major players were in the consumer goods industry. And they took all this data and rolled it up into company scores and then industry sector and national scores. And so that's really how the project started. It was very much in line with what we today call customer experience, but of course it was focused on the satisfaction of end user consumers of goods and services across the economy.
Okay. And so if I'm sitting in the C-suite of a corporation, we'll get to the government side of it in a few minutes. But if I'm in the C-suite, why should I care? Would people say, I really care about the bottom line, and I can't really correlate satisfaction, customer satisfaction. It's a nice number. It's nice to know we want to keep our customers happy. And of course, we put customers first. But why should I care about this?
It's a really interesting metric in the sense that customer satisfaction, like you say, is to some extent a feel-good measure. We want to know about it because we want to know we're doing right by our customers. I think we care about that more now than, at least at most times in the past. What we've done with the research at the ACSI and a lot of my academic research has showed that it has future-oriented consequences as well. And those consequences are directly related to the bottom line. Companies with more satisfied customers, and I should put in a caveat here that this does vary across industries and sectors, right? There are certain industries and sectors where satisfaction matters more, and this is in the sense of the relationship between satisfaction and downstream outcomes. But it matters in virtually every industry to the bottom line, whether you're looking at the bottom line as earnings, if you're looking at the bottom line as stock market performance. We've shown that there's a relationship between how well companies treat their customers and how they do on the stock market in the future. It matters, right? So it's much more than a feel-good number. It turns out that understanding from the perspective of the customer, the quality of their experiences with firms, has real tangible economic consequences for companies in the future.
Okay. All right. So I would love to dig into that a little bit more. But first, let's take a look at, I want to talk a little bit about the latest trends from ACSI. And I took a look at the consumer side, the B2C, I guess, side of it. And if you look at the ACSI, it was steadily increasing over the last 10 years or so. From just above 70 to 77, and then it started dropping in 2018, which was before COVID. And then really tanked during COVID, and then had some huge uptick, starting in mid-2022 to 2023, where it's all the way back up to 78 last quarter. This is on the consumer side. And then recently there was a press release that had your name attached to it on the government side, that said its citizen satisfaction with the U.S. federal government agency services continues to improve, advancing 2.9% to a score of 68.2 out of 100, according to ACSI Federal Government Report 2023. And the positive momentum builds upon even a larger gain last year when citizen satisfaction jumped a whopping 4.6%. So still slightly below the consumer side, but number one, could you explain two things to the audience, and then we'll get into the correlation to ROI and profitability, earnings, and stock market shareholder return. Sure. Two things is one, the reason, because it happened before COVID, so the reason for the drop, and then the reason for the uptick, and then if there's any correlation between the government side and the consumer side.
Those are both great questions, complicated ones, but great questions. We had seen strong positive momentum starting in about 2010, as you noted, and customer satisfaction was pretty steadily ticking up, small incremental gains, but sort of year after year after year, you see these gains and you say, wow, something's going on here. That will also, as you know, correlate pretty well with the sort of increased focus companies started giving to the customer experience, not necessarily customer experience management, but just the increased sort of emphasis we were putting on that. And so we saw a steady uptick there, companies talking a lot about their investment in resources for measuring their relationship with customers, sort of all sorts of new tools available in the market, and we saw that uptick. We then saw, like you said, in 2018, so a couple of years before COVID hit, we saw it start to retreat. The why there has always been difficult to establish. Some of it was probably related to the macro economy. One of the interesting things we found with this data is that as there's sort of a cyclical relationship between satisfaction and the economy at the national level, satisfaction that is, in that when you've got lower unemployment rates, sort of a better economic picture in the traditional sense, you tend to see satisfaction start to decline a little bit. The logic we've been able to wrap around that is that as the unemployment rate goes down, employees feel more empowered. They're able to move around between jobs, and they do. They job switch. They look for better positions. And that leads to new people in their old positions who may not be as skilled at offering customer service experiences. So I think some of that was at play when we had a really strong economy in the 2018 era. And then so we saw it start to tick down slowly. It really accelerated, though, with COVID. And I think the reasons behind that are pretty transparent, right? Service became dramatically reduced during COVID because of supply chain issues. The supply of goods available in the market became much more limited. And then quickly thereafter, we had, huge increases in prices, sort of the biggest we've seen in 40 or 50 years, and really steadily rising inflation. And that stuck around for a couple of years and sort of depressed satisfaction. The uptick, the swing back up, was the most dramatic we've ever seen in ACSI, and it coincides with the economy getting back to normal, people, getting back out into the world and really experiencing the economy as a regular economy again for the first time after the COVID pandemic had hit. The supply chain went, closer back to normal. I know it's still tough in some sectors even today. And then prices didn't decrease, but they started to stabilize for the first time in several years, and sort of put all that together. And consumers, so we're sort of like, okay, things are going back to normal, and I'm more satisfied with the products like I used to be. And I think that explains really the reversal of the big drops we saw during COVID. But, and I always like to note this, I know this isn't a satisfying answer. It's a complicated set of variables in this equation, right? You've got a lot of moving parts here, and things that we simply can't measure with domestic customer satisfaction. What are imports and exports like? What's going on globally in the world? Energy prices, have such a big impact on inflation and have very little to do with customer satisfaction. Things like that are really tough to forecast. But I think we've, in watching these trends all of these years, have a pretty good idea of where the downswing and the upswing reversal came from.
And then somewhere around 2020, toward the end of it, the current presidential administration, by the time this airs, there may be a new presidential administration in place, but the Biden administration came out with an executive order all around customer experience, saying, look, we need to start implementing methodologies and best practices across the agencies. We'll start with a few of them. Do you attribute any of that to the improvement on the federal side?
To be perfectly honest with you, I would attribute very little of that to those kinds of things. So I've been fortunate enough to be looking at and studying specifically citizen satisfaction data through the ACSI and other sources for 20 plus years now. It's really one of the things that I was most interested in early along in my academic career and in my research career in general. And I've had the honor of working with a variety of government agencies on citizen satisfaction questions. One thing that's been constant over that whole period, and for at least 20 years before I was doing all this work, so now going back to the 1980s, is there's been this emphasis on we have to improve citizen satisfaction. We need to treat citizens like customers. We need to bring them the best possible services. And this has gone on through legislation and initiatives through OMB and presidential executive orders and thing after thing after thing. And we've got what's called GPRA, and then an improvement on GPRA in 2011, the Government Performance and Results Act, which says you've got to measure citizen satisfaction. You've got to report it to Congress and all these things. And to be perfectly honest, we've seen very little tangible come out of that in terms of how satisfied citizens in the aggregate really are. And the reason is not really the fault of government. It's not the fault of effort. It's not to blame on any single presidential administration or political ideology. It's that we emphasize having on the first hand, or on the one hand, sort of lean, efficient government. And when you have lean, efficient government, that means you're doing as little as possible to get the basic outcome that you need, right? And so when it comes to customer service, we don't want the government rolling out 100,000 new employees to personally greet us on the telephone when we call. We want to have, automated telephone systems that as seamlessly and efficiently as possible route citizens to where they need to go for those services. But we don't want extravagances. We want it to be lean and efficient. I think virtually everyone agrees with that, right? Is that we want relatively lean and efficient government that makes the best possible uses of our tax dollars. The other problem with citizen satisfaction is that so much of what government is asked to do is not provide services, but rather enforce laws and regulations. And so in that sense, it has what we call in the political science world, it has a coercive element to it, right? None of us really cares how good our service is when we file our taxes. We're not going to be happy with the tax filing process because we're giving up a bunch of money in the end, right? There's very limited things that you can do to make that process pleasing to people. We want to make it as convenient as possible, as efficient as possible. We don't want it to be unnecessarily burdensome. And government's done some good things with e-government and the online tax filing process and so forth to make it easier. But we're never going to love it, right? It's never going to be as satisfying as, I stayed at a great hotel over the weekend while on vacation. Right. That's something you can say. I was actually delighted by my hotel stay. It was beautiful. I was on the beach. It was wonderful. We're never going to say that about the IRS, and that's not our expectations of them. We want them to provide efficient service. So sort of long story short, I think, we're always going to be limited in the government space to the sort of the levels of satisfaction we're going to be able to reach. It will almost always trail almost all private sector industries. Cable TV, ISP usually comes in below government. But other than that, very little scores worse than government.
Yeah. So share with us some common myths or misconceptions that people have when it comes to customer satisfaction and the way to assess, evaluate, utilize it.
There's a bunch of those things that I've seen over the course of my career and in studying this data, how companies, sort of the gap between how companies measure not just customer satisfaction, but sort of their customer service provision, their customer experience, all of those things, the gap between how they do that and what's sort of optimal for doing that. It's not as easy as writing out a 15-word customer satisfaction question, throwing it on a form on a website somewhere and asking customers to fill it out. There's much more to it. And satisfaction in and of itself is an important metric to have, but ultimately there is no, unlike some recent marketing research fads, there is no single question that you can ask that's going to solve all of your problems and answer all your questions. Satisfaction is inherently and always within a system of relationships, right? There are things that are influencing it and things that are influenced by it, and we need to know those as well. So sort of the basic notion, that would be the first sort of misconception I always have, is that, satisfaction or any metric is sufficient in its own right. You need to understand what's driving it and what it is driving and how that impacts business outcomes, tangible business outcomes. That's one I'd start with.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, you could rely too heavily on one particular question or metric, and you want to be careful. It's all part of an ecosystem of information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we've seen a lot of this thinking, and unfortunately with the problems with response rates that we have now to surveys, whether they're asked, over the email on a website or SMS text message surveying that companies are doing, companies really feel constrained with the number of questions that they can have in a survey. And so they end up limiting themselves. And, I would say that to some extent they need to stick with traditional marketing research venues for that, exactly that reason, and do some of the things that we've been doing for 25 years, not just, text people right after they leave the store with one question or three questions and those sorts of things. But it is a tough environment. Consumers just don't want to answer surveys like they used to.
Yeah. As you're talking about the government and us not wanting more, 100 people greeting us from the government, reminds me of the joke, "Hi, I'm from the IRS. I'm here to help you."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious, and this is kind of stream of consciousness question, but as you talk about, I'm thinking about, for the first time in our history, we've got an individual appointed to create efficiencies in government operation. And it's Elon Musk. And he's talked about cutting $2 trillion out of the budget. What is your thought about how I mean, it's impossible to have all the information at this early, but how do you think like that's going to play out?
Oh boy, I could make a lot of money if I had an answer to that question. I'd be willing on a betting market somewhere. I could make a lot of money. I really don't know how that's going to work out. I know that, from a historical perspective, this is not the first time a radical rethinking of government towards greater efficiency has been brought up. The U.S. government is a huge, huge thing. And when I mean huge, it's just got a ton of different tentacles. If you want to think of it as an octopus, it's got way more than 8 tentacles stretching out everywhere. Those tentacles are, career administrative officials who are doing really important work. And you can say, we're going to slash, $100 billion from this part of the government, and it's going to be easy, and we're going to save tons of money. You're going to find out that money is not as easy to slash as you thought it was, and that it goes to support a whole bunch of things that all citizens, not just part of one party or part of the other, all citizens really like. That's really hard to do. It's a really tough challenge, and I think it's objectively true that we need some of that, right? We have, we're running deficits that we can't sustain.
Right.
At the same time, we're going to radically rethink government and do this is a difficult prospect when you get in front of a Congress that says, oh, wait a minute, you're going to slash all these military installations. Those are all in my state. You're not doing that. You're going to slash, 40% of my constituents get that benefit from the government. You're not slashing that. And ultimately, this will have to be done through law, and it's going to be a real tough sled. So I guess I'll end by saying I wish Mr. Musk good luck.
Okay, well, in terms of strategies, if you're a business leader and you are interested in improving earnings and you want to do it, earnings or profit or business outcomes that are critical to you, and you have the context of customer satisfaction in mind, what might be some strategies that you might recommend to them?
Oh, that's a big question, and it's a big question because really it's going to vary. It's going to vary by what kind of industry you're in, what kind of services you're offering to your customers, what kind of products you're offering to those customers. Is it a mix of both of those things? So to some extent, that's going to vary from firm to firm and industry to industry. I think in general, though, one of the things that we can sort of recommend that spans across the spectrum, if you will, of different companies doing different things is that there are a lot of areas of relatively easy wins that you can focus on. If most of your customers are doing business on a website, if they're, m-commerce or e-commerce customers, finding ways to optimize that experience can be relatively inexpensive and a relatively easy way to make the customer journey a little bit smoother. Not every company is on a website, right? And so we want to improve earnings. We're in a brick and mortar retail environment. Let's say we want to offer strong customer service, but we're having trouble with labor costs. How can we integrate new, self-service technologies in a way that customers like, right? I've watched this for, years. People complain about the self-service technologies and, self-checkout at grocery stores now and stuff like. I love that. I never, even if there's an open lane, I'm still going through the self-service checkout, right? And I think for a lot of consumers, there's some that complain about it. I'm unpaid labor checking out my own groceries after I go to the grocery store. I see it as I can do it. I can perfectly satisfy me as a consumer. I'll go through and I'll do it as fast as I want or as slow as I want, and I'll put my stuff in the bag the way I want, and I'll walk out. I think that's been underplayed a little bit. The whole notion that these self-service technologies are taking the personalized human element out of customer experience. When I go to the grocery store, I don't want a personalized experience. I want to go pick out what I want. I want to check out as fast as I want and get back in my car and leave. And but there's all sorts of stuff like that. How can we, without increasing costs and maybe even decreasing costs, streamline our services, to better please customers.
Yeah. Since I've got you on the show and you studied this, one of the, I guess, golden keys that CX leaders are looking for on the one hand, and part of it's because of a lot of pressure to get the ROI of CX, right? And so since we're talking and you've done so much studying on satisfaction, explain how one might begin the conversation about correlating the two, improving satisfaction. I mean, it makes intuitive sense, but I can't tell you how many, even people in the CX world, will argue against using any correlation between satisfaction and ROI. Maybe partly because of, like you had mentioned earlier, there's so many variables there in the soup. But if you were going to begin to do that, how would you begin to make the case for improving customer satisfaction equals better earnings and better stock market performance?
Yeah, I mean, it is very complicated, and I don't want to pretend that it's not. And there are a lot of both endogenous and exogenous variables in all of these models. And there's always things that are outside the system that we can't predict with customer satisfaction. But the first thing that you need to do is measure it and track it, right? So get a reliable indicator of customer satisfaction, measure it at regular intervals. The system I generally talk with both industry people, but students as well, is embed customer satisfaction into something like a customer lifetime value model, where you're looking over time at changes in your customer satisfaction relative to your churn rate, either your actual churn rate or some kind of proxy that you can come up with through survey research, and then look at your bottom line over time. And there's going to be exogenous shocks in that model. There's going to be changes to the economy that make it difficult to perfectly correlate those two things. But in a lot of cases, and I've got case studies and done both sort of practical and academic research on the topic, you can see really, really clear trends over time. Firms investing more in the customer experience in profitable ways, right? Not overinvest. We never want to maximize satisfaction. We want to optimize it. We want to be just slightly better than our competitors, right? We don't want to be perfect. We want to be just slightly better than our competitors. But, reach those levels, seeing some moderate improvement or stability as others go down, the impact that has on customer loyalty, the long-term consequences on that for the lifetime value of your customers. And then, if you can control those exogenous factors that are impacting the economy, you should be able to see it show up in things like your return on investment, in your earnings statements, in your stock market performance, and so forth.
One of the things I'd like to do is pull out some of the gems that the guests have gone through, and you just shared a couple there. I just want to slow down and pull them out. So if you're trying to do a correlation, I acknowledge that there's lots that goes into that soup, both internal and external. But one of the things you can do is look at the change in satisfaction levels as it connects to CLV, and look at something either like churn or proxy for churn that may allow you to do a correlation. It sounds complicated, but it's actually very doable.
It is. Yeah, it is not terribly complex. Once there's several things in there you sort of have to wrap your mind around, and there's resources involved in getting that satisfaction data and getting accurate churn data. I tell this to students, and they're shocked to this day, but a lot of companies have no idea what their churn rate is, right? It's just there's too many customers, or they don't have the ability to track individual customers in a really accurate way. Fewer than there used to be, but still a lot of companies just don't have those numbers. But if you can get that data, and then importantly, and this is really important, and this varies by industry more than anything else, there's always a time lag between this, right? It's not going to be our satisfaction's up today, our ROI or our customer churn is down tomorrow, or ROA is up tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. And that time lag varies by industry. So if you're doing something that's, a fast purchase, consumption, repurchase cycle, you can, have a relatively short time lag in there. It may be weeks or months, but for automobiles, for household appliances. You buy it, you use it, you like it, you buy a new one 6 or 7 years later, right? And so there's a much longer time lag there, and that has to be kept in mind. But again, I agree with you. I don't think it's as hard as people think it is if you can come up with reliable data.
So that's a great one. That's the first one that you said, and then the second one I heard you said was which you kind of went over quickly, but it's really worth double clicking on, which is maximize versus optimizing the customer experience. And it's interesting. The name of this show is called the Delighted Customers Podcast, but I'm the first to acknowledge that we shouldn't be aiming to delight every customer in every interaction. But could you expand on the why of that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think as consumers, and there are very different kinds of consumers out there. Consumers are idiosyncratic, and opinions vary as widely as they do in any other area of human life. But I think as consumers, generally speaking, we neither expect, and even in some cases, we don't want to be delighted. Delighted implies some kind of really concerted effort to make you above and beyond happy, or in the language of satisfaction measurement, to radically exceed our expectations, right? I think what most of us want is to have our expectations met and maybe slightly exceeded, right? I want to go get what I thought I was going to get from a retailer, from a fast food restaurant, from a full service restaurant, wherever I'm going. And if it's a little bit better, that's terrific. I'll probably be more likely to come back. When you get into we want to offer you a perfect experience, right? Most of us don't see that as something that we're out looking for. No one is going to radically exceed our expectations every time we come in, and I don't think we expect that, right? And so I just say, listen, the most profitable way to look at customer satisfaction, you're going to have a whole bunch of competitors within your industry if you're in a competitive industry. We want to do as well or better than all of them. That's it, right? That's still a really high bar to set. But at the same time, it's not we're going to do perfect. There's unexpected error, right? There's uncontrollable error in customer service delivery, product delivery, whatever it may be. And so we know we're not going to do perfect, and we don't want to set that as a standard because we're going to fail. And who wants to fail as a business leader time after time? We want to say we're going to do better than everybody else in the industry. And through that, we're going to win the most new customers and keep the most loyal customers. And so I think that's a more realistic standard for companies to set.
Yeah, I like how you painted that with the customers really don't expect perfect every time. So why should we strive for it? And I think also there's a very practical, and tell me what you think about this, practical business reasoning behind this is that it's going to cost us a lot of money to go from 95% to 100%.
Exactly. And that's where it'll cost the most money, right? Yeah. I mean, that's where it's going to cost the most money. Those few stragglers who are still having problems with your business, I don't think there's a way to engineer a perfect product or engineer a perfect customer service to make all of them happy, and to do it would be cost prohibitive.
Yeah, I had Horst Schulze from one of the founders of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel on one of the episodes, and he said, and when people go there, they pay a lot of money and they do expect a near perfect experience. But what he said was 3% of all customers are just jerks.
Yep.
And we're not going to please them no matter what we do.
Yeah, it's probably low for some industries, but yeah, I mean there are certain customers that are just impossible to please.
Yeah,
and that's got to be that's another one of those unexplained factors in your model that you just can't account for.
I know, since you have such an incredible grasp of the ACSI, and you mentioned earlier about some of the differences between industries. That are in terms of sensitivity to satisfaction, which just maybe the several that are sort of on the one end versus the other end that are maybe more sensitive, and some that really not so sensitive to satisfaction changes.
Oh, your commoditized industries are the ones that I always like to talk about. So any good that is fairly exchangeable across different suppliers doesn't have a lot of satisfaction impact, right? So, gasoline is an inelastic product when it comes to customer satisfaction. The service related to gasoline purchases matters. But, for most part, it's a self-service industry. Prices are relatively constant. Not much is going to change satisfaction from one gas station to another gas station. And therefore, you don't see a strong link between them.
Yeah.
But anything that has a large number of competitors, differentiation between the products or services that are being offered, those industries are going to generally have a higher relationship between customer satisfaction and customer loyalty. If we don't have a choice, if it's our energy utility, right, there's virtually no impact between customer satisfaction and loyalty, or a very small impact. We don't say, I'm not buying electricity this month because the electric company made me mad. No, we have to have electricity. It's non-discretionary. We need to have that product. So it sort of relates back, generally speaking, to the level of competition in an industry and how exchangeable or interchangeable products across competitors is.
Excellent. Love the conversation. Could talk all day to you, but we do have to land the plane. I want to ask you the same question I ask all my guests here at the end here, which is, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
What advice would I give to my 20-year-old self? It's going to be a rough 32 years. I turned 52 yesterday. Woo-hoo. So it's been 32 years since then. So it's going to be bumpy, but it's going to be good. That's what I would tell. It's going to be bumpy. Learn to, prepare for the bumps, but it's going to be okay in the end. You're going to make it through.
Awesome. So much fun. Before we sign off, I want to give one little plug to Michigan State University and the Customer Experience Management, the MSCXM program. Couldn't be more proud to be on the same team and part of your team, Forrest.
Thank you. It's great having you. It's great to have been here. Let's keep talking CXM. I'd love to come back someday.
Excellent. And if folks wanted to get a hold of you, either related to what we talked about today, perhaps learn more about customer satisfaction or the index itself, or more about the MSU program, what might be the best way?
Go to the website of the MSU Marketing Department. We've got all of our contact information up there, and we can answer any questions as they come in.
Forrest Morgeson, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Mark. Great being here.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Delighted Customers podcast. It would mean so much if you would take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts, click on the plus sign or follow button, and that will ensure that you don't miss an episode, and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you'd leave a 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday.